Good evening. So tonight we are going to do a part 2.5 years later, of The Old Ways Are Alive. So I've been doing videos for you guys for about 2.5 years. I have over 50 videos on various pagan and social topics. So tonight I would like to go back to the very first video and almost do a little update about it. As I said, it's called The Old Ways Are Alive. We're going to examine that. The last video, or the first video, Old Ways Are Alive, was a picture slideshow. And being a picture slideshow just with little text boxes, you don't really get to go into a lot of detail, even though the video is 7 minutes long. But now that YouTube has allowed me to be able to upload 20-30 minute videos, and I can talk, we can get a lot more information on the table, and you can actually, it's like in real time. I can show you tools, I can show you books, I can be more direct. So first, let me introduce myself. My YouTube username is Paige Montague. That is not my real name. It is just an online alias, so to speak. I didn't feel comfortable using my real name because it's the internet. I don't need people searching for me on Facebook or finding out where I lived. Okay, so I was a little paranoid in my earlier college years. But there was a good reason. I also didn't need people figuring out who I was, because there are people out there who don't really appreciate people like me, so it was just, I was kind of sheltering myself. So Paige is not my real name. I do, however, actually live in Massachusetts. I'm not going to hide that. I do go to school at UMass. I major in English writing, and my first minor is in religious studies. My second minor is English literature. I have lived with some of my friends for the past few years, and I now am married to my husband. We got married in January, and we live together with our friends. This is our room, and I am 24 years old. I'm going to be 25 in the fall, so I am still quite young. However, I am not a child anymore. Just as a disclaimer to people who have said, well, you're young, you'll learn. I have learned. That's who I am now. That's why I am the way I am. Even though I'm 24 and still a kid. I have a lot of experience. I love to read, but I am a huge movie buff. I saw The Hunger Games twice. I love that movie. I love the books. I saw Brave twice already. I love going out. I used to like going to clubs. I hate school because I struggle with certain classes and I don't have a great social life, nor do I care to, because it's college and it's going to be over for me in 9 months. So as you can see, I'm pretty typical. I am moderately liberal in that I'm all for equal rights, but I am kind of financially conservative. So I may be unique in my own ways. I'm maybe not like a lot of 20-somethings. But at the same time, maybe I am. I'm quite normal and quite typical, and just like everybody else, there are things about me that are unique, and there are things about me that are mundane, even though I am a magical person. So that's me. You couldn't pick me out of a crowd unless, of course, I've just had a holiday. So let's go back to why the old ways are alive. Let's go back to the very first video. Paganism is a broad umbrella term. Actually, I have a book for that. Things are falling. Okay. So this book, Paganism, An Introduction to Earth-Centered Religions. Oh, and it's going to be backwards for you, I'm sorry. It's by Joyce and River Higginbotham. And there is a really cool image in here that I think sums it up quite awesomely. So, as you can see, there's a picture of an umbrella and it says Paganism. And underneath the umbrella are rain droplets, and each rain droplet represents a different pagan religion. And it just goes to explain that being pagan is the same thing as saying you're Christian. When you say you're Christian, you've just identified what religion or a group of religions you're part of. When you're Christian, you can be Catholic, you can be Baptist, Northern or Southern, you can be Pentecostal, I'm pretty sure that's Christian. You can be Mormon, Christian. You can be Episcopalian. You can be Congregational. There's so many different types of denominations of Christianity or sects of Christianity. However, with paganism, it is somewhat different. Paganism is a term for multiple religions, even though paganism is the umbrella term. So when I say I'm pagan, that doesn't say that much. However, the first thing many people think of is Wiccan. All pagans are Wiccan, right? That's what pagan means. Pagan means Wiccan. No. All these rain droplets, and this isn't even everything. There are so many different pagan religions. That's just a small chunk of them. In this book, she's identified Celtic and Druidism. Even though those two are very similar, they're related. The Druids were Celtic priests. So they've identified Celtic and Druidism, ceremonial magic, Santeria, Asatru, Voodoo, Shamanism, eclectic paganism, solitary, Wicca, family traditions, and blended. I want to critique that a little bit, just in my personal experience. Solitary is just how you practice. You can be a solitary Asatru, you can be a solitary Wiccan. Solitary really isn't a sect or a pagan religion. Blended, to me, says the same thing as eclectic. Family traditions, also the same thing as solitary. It's just how you practice. Family traditions, however, though, certain witchcraft traditions could have been passed down into the family. They may not be necessarily Wiccan. They may be unique to that family, even though they might be technically called witchcraft or Wicca. And even under the umbrella term of Wicca as well, you've got Gardnerian Wicca, British traditional Wicca, you've got Alexandrian Wicca, and you've got Dianic Wicca, and I'm sure there's a few others too. With Asatru might just be another way of saying Norse or Germanic reconstruction. Asatru is the revival that happened, the revival of Norse Germanic paganism that occurred in the 1970s. And like I said, there are so many different, this is just a small collection, and you can find it in this book. I think this is a great book for starters. And she's even got all the traditions listed, even the ones that aren't under the umbrella. She's got Wicca, and then Gardnerian, Alexandrian, Dianic, Fairy Wicca, Strega, which is Italian Wicca, Shamanism, Asatru, eclectic, family traditions, Celtic traditionalism, Druidism, Santeria, and Voodoo, ceremonial magic, mystery traditions, solitary and blended traditions, and you might want to start with just this book and go from there. So that's the pagan umbrella term. But how do you define paganism? Well, it depends. The original term was used by the Romans when they were conquering Western Europe. Pagan is the term that they used for those polytheistic tribal heathens, essentially. The non-Roman Celts and the Druids and the Germans. Pagan means basically simple folk, country dweller. It was a derogatory term that they used. Now today, if we had that same derogatory term, what would it mean for us nowadays? Even though it wouldn't be the term pagan, but that same country dweller, simpleton type. We would call people today rednecks or hicks. So that term has gone through a rebirth. Pagan no longer means what that the original definition was. The definition now fits the term redneck, if that made any sense. So, back during the Roman Empire, the Roman expansion, the pagans were the people they conquered. They were the Germans, not Scandinavians, I don't think they got that far north. I am not a scholar on Romans, just who they conquered. They conquered up through the British Isles, far west is France. They owned Europe, essentially. Now, to call somebody pagan back then was to insult them. And because the Romans conquered Europe maybe parts of northern Africa. How do we apply the term today? Do we just apply it to European traditions? Because the term was referred to the Europeans, the European tribes, the European cultures that the Romans conquered? Or do we expand it? As the term no longer means simpleton or country dweller, or it's no longer really a derogatory term. Since we've changed it that way, can we also change it to include all world religions that would fall under that term? For example, of course we have witchcraft traditions and Celtic traditions and the Asatru tradition. Those are pagan. However, do we expand that to include Greco-Roman? Do we expand it to include African diaspora, or the African diaspora, or just African traditions? Do we include that? Do we expand it to include Native American traditions, shamanism? Now, mind you, all these practices, even though they've been revived and reconstructed today, these cultures have existed, and these types of practices have existed since humans first figured out that they probably weren't alone. This goes back 5, 10, 15, 20,000 or more years. Now, agriculture itself, I think, is 5,000, 6,000 years old, maybe 7. It's been a while since I took anthropology. So, during the agricultural revolution, that's when we started settling down and we rooted ourselves. But even before then, we had gods and we had traditions and we had ties to earth and to the seasons. We lived our lives by them. So, because the entire humans in general had these practices, even though they were all different, they were mostly all polytheistic. Many of them were matriarchal. Their beliefs revolved around nature, the seasons, and eventually agriculture, and so on and so on. And of course, these cultures and faith traditions were all over the world. Today, we have revivals of them. Now, do we call them all pagan, or do we just call the European ones pagan? Now, that is something we really can't define because we're kind of divided on that. And I don't think it's a huge deal. I don't. Because some people don't even like the term pagan for themselves, even if they are practicing a European tradition. So, we are kind of a divided community on that. I, however, have retaken or reclaimed the term pagan. I think we can make it ours again. Sure, it meant country dweller, or meant people who creep around the forest, or simpletons. Even though we're no longer simpletons, and there's not all of us live in the country, so to speak, we can reclaim that term. It's okay. That term can be used to describe us now. So, after that huge spiel, how do we define it? Excluding geographical location. Pagan today means polytheistic, but not exclusively. There are some people who might be monotheistic, but also pagan. So, polytheistic in general, whose religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs revolve around nature or the natural cycles of life. The seasons, the elements, earth, air, fire, water, or maybe for some people fire is not an element, has to do with heritage, perhaps, ancestral traditions. Like if you're like me, you're English, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, you've got strong connections to your Celtic ancestors and Druidism. If you're like some of my Norse friends and you're connected to your Viking ancestors, your Scandinavian roots, you're an Asatru. For a lot of us, it's all about the ancestors and our heritage and ties to the earth and ties to nature and the gods through that. So it has kind of a broad definition. Polytheistic, nature-based, gods and goddesses. See the seasons, agricultural holidays like Letha. Letha would be one of the solstices. May Day would be the planting holiday, whereas Samhain or Walpurgisnacht, if you're Scandinavian or German, would be the day to remember the ancestors. So you've got your agricultural holidays, but you've also got your non-agricultural holidays to celebrate fertility, to celebrate the ancestors, to celebrate the equinoxes and solstices. So all these can be considered pagan, if you want to use the term. If you don't want to use the term, the question is, how do we define ourselves then? Do we define ourselves by our individual religions? I'm Celtic. Pagan? No. Because you can't use the word pagan if we're going to go that way. What do I call myself? If I'm not a Celtic pagan, am I a druid? Not all Celtic pagans are druid. So it becomes difficult. If we're not Asatru, what are we? Do we consider ourselves a heathen? Maybe some people don't like the word heathen. Are we a Norse Reconstructionist? Are we a Norse pagan? So it becomes a debate on what do we call ourselves? And that's something the pagan community has to figure out for itself. So today we are, yes, we call ourselves pagan, but what about neo-pagan? Neo-pagan just means new. Well, technically, wouldn't we all be neo-pagan if we aren't our ancestors? The ancestors were the pagan, pagan tribes, the Celts, the Druids, the Scandinavians, the Greco-Romans. They were the ancestors, they were pagan. A couple thousand years later, shouldn't we attach the neo to that? Are we neo-pagan? Again, it depends on who you ask. Neo-pagan to some people might mean entirely new forms of paganism, which would be Wicca, some more modern witchcraft traditions and practices that were not held or upheld or practiced by our ancestors. I'm all for that. However, even what I practice today, Celtic Druidism, well, we don't know everything that the Druids did. I have to fill in the gaps, and I fill that in with witchcraft. So, do we or do we not attach the neo to our pagan? I guess I would technically be a neo-pagan, even though 90% of what I practice and believe in belong to my ancestors. Again, debate for the pagan community. So the next question is, how do we decide to become pagan? What draws us to pagan religions? My answer would be, it fits my personality. Just like some people, it works out for them to be vegetarian, it works out for them to be liberal or Democrat, it works out for them to live in Sweden even though they're American. It just depends on what you're drawn to and who you are as a person. Everybody is individual. People will ask, well, don't you believe in Jesus? As if our choice to be not a Christian is indicative of our refusal to acknowledge Jesus' existence. And my answer is yes, I do believe in Jesus, and a lot of pagans do believe that he existed as a person. And then the next question would be, well, if you believe in Jesus, how come you just can't be Christian? Well, here's the thing. Christianity is not the default religion for us, for the human race, for white people, for Westerners. It's not a default religion. It is not the only choice there is. It is quite new compared to a lot of the traditions and beliefs we are keeping alive. There are the old ways. Christianity is quite new. Not to say that it's bad because it's newer, it's just that maybe for us the draw is the appeal towards our ancestors. For some of us, we aren't drawn to our Christian ancestors who lived in Protestant Reformation England. For some of us, the draw is our ancestors that worshipped at Stonehenge or that lived in or lived in northern Scotland, in stone cottages. Maybe that's the appeal for some of us. So yes, I do believe that Jesus Christ was a person. He was just long-haired hippie just like me. He might have had different ideals though. I believe he existed. Why can't I be Christian? Because I don't acknowledge his divinity, because I don't believe the Bible, the stories in the Bible that actually happened. I believe, when I know now through my experience with my classes and what I've read on my own and what I've experienced on my own, the Bible isn't real. Both to me as a person, it's not real to me, and I don't believe that it's the Word of God. I can't be a Christian without those ideals and beliefs. Now, a lot of people associate pagans' choice to be pagan with the flat-out rejection of Christianity, and that is also not true. Just because we've chosen to take on these controversial religions, being an Asatruer or a Druid or other various pagan paths, just because we've decided to follow on these paths does not mean we're rejecting Christ. A lot of people like to use the word "you're rejecting Christ." Here's the thing, reject is a very, very strong word. It is not the same thing as no thanks, it's not for me. We are not rejecting Christ. We are saying no thanks, it's not for me. There is a huge difference, and the two are not interchangeable. So when people say that we're rejecting Christ, that stereotype stays alive like you have no idea. And it's not true. I respect Christianity as a religion, even though I'm not really fond of the Bible. The beliefs, the teachings of Jesus are awesome. Some of them exist in certain forms in paganism. He who is without sin cast the first stone, no judging, and even some of the 10 Commandments. Even though that we pagans don't have our own commandments, thou shalt not kill, come on now. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's a rule in Wicca. Harm none. It's very simple. Even though even though we don't have a Bible or the 10 Commandments, the teachings of Jesus, even though we don't have a Jesus figure, well, some of us do. He's called Horus. But even though we don't have those same teachings or the 10 Commandments, that shouldn't suggest that we don't have guidelines or laws or rules. You know what I mean? We're not drawn to paganism out of pure rebellion, out of rejection for Christ or the Bible or the Lord God. That's not accurate at all. It's because we're just drawn to it. Like some people are drawn to Christianity. Like some people are drawn to Sweden instead of the country they were born in, America. It's like some people want a vacation at Disney World while some people want to go mountain climbing in Alaska. It's a lot bigger because they're life-altering choices and their beliefs, but it's that same uniqueness. Some people want to vote Republican, some people want to vote Democrat. It's just who we are as people. It doesn't make us bad. It doesn't make us bad people. It means we have different ideas. Some people like to paint and do art. Some people are not creative at all. There are many, many examples I could use. Let's move on to part 2. Or actually part 3.